War has always been part of us, but some battles, they weren't just deadly, they were pure hell. In these nightmares made real, soldiers didn't just face bullets or blades, they faced betrayal, starvation, frostbite, exhaustion, even their own commanders turning on them. This isn't a history lesson, this is war at its worst, where survival was a miracle and death was mercy. These are the top 5 deadliest battles in history, the kind you wouldn't survive. Let the horror begin. The Battle of Agincourt, 1415. France, October 25th, 1415. A muddy field near the small village of Agincourt, nestled in the north of France. This is where one of the most unlikely victories in military history would unfold. It was St. Crispin's Day, and the dawn of a blood-soaked legend. The 100 Years' War had raged between England and France for decades, a bitter, tangled conflict over thrones, pride, and power. King Henry V of England, young but fierce, believed he had a rightful claim to the French crown. To press his claim, he launched a campaign deep into enemy territory. But by the time he reached Agincourt, his army was battered, starving, and outnumbered. Nearly 6,000 English soldiers faced a force of over 20,000 French knights and men-at-arms. It should have been a slaughter, but the muddy terrain and tight battlefield would turn the tide. Henry placed his longbowmen behind wooden stakes, and as the French knights charged, their horses sank into the thick, rain-soaked mud. Then came the hail of arrows, thousands of them, darkening the sky. Armour crumpled, horses screamed, men suffocated under the weight of bodies and steel. The battlefield turned into a swamp of blood and filth. French nobility died in heaps, trapped, trampled, butchered. And when the English feared another charge, Henry gave a brutal command: execute the prisoners. Hundreds of captured French knights were slain, helpless. In the end, over 6,000 French troops lay dead. The English? Barely a few hundred. Agincourt wasn't just a victory, it was a massacre and a message that cunning, terrain, and strategy could defeat brute power, that war had changed, and that even kings could carve legends from the mud. Henry V became a hero in England. He later forced the French to sign the Treaty of Troyes, naming him heir to the French throne. He ruled both kingdoms briefly, but fate had other plans. Just 7 years later, in 1422, Henry died of dysentery during another campaign in France. He never lived to see his united empire, but his legacy, written forever in history. And Agincourt, a symbol of courage, brutality, and one of the most unbelievable military upsets of all time. The Battle of Manzikert. The year is 1071. The place, Manzikert. A small fortress town in eastern Anatolia. Today it's known as Manzikert, Turkey. To the east lies the vast Seljuk Empire, young and aggressive. To the west, the once mighty Byzantine Empire, old, proud, but crumbling from within. At the head of the Byzantine army marches Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes, leading over 40,000 troops, a mix of elite guards, foreign mercenaries, and feudal levies. His goal? To drive back the Seljuk Turks, who have been raiding deeper and deeper into Byzantine lands. But Romanos is not just fighting an enemy abroad. He carries with him rivals, schemers, traitors. Building tension. Romanos expects to link up with a second Byzantine force led by Andronicus Ducas, a general loyal not to the empire, but to a rival political faction in Constantinople. On August 26, 1071, the emperor's army sets up camp near Manzikert, but the Seljuks, led by Sultan Alp Arslan, are already prepared. Instead of charging in, they use the land like a weapon. Mounted horse archers, lightning fast, strike and vanish. They feign retreats. They draw out the Byzantines, stretching them thin. Romanos tries to hold formation, but confusion spreads like wildfire, and then betrayal. At the worst possible moment, Andronicus Ducas abandons the battlefield, turning his army around. Worse, he spreads word that the emperor is dead. Chaos erupts. The Byzantine lines fall apart, command crumbles, units scatter, and the Seljuks move in for the kill. Arrows rain down like a storm, thousands are cut down, bodies pile atop one another, screams echo across the dry plains. What was meant to be a demonstration of imperial power becomes a massacre. By nightfall, the Byzantine army is shattered. Up to 30,000 soldiers are killed or captured, the rest flee, broken, leaderless, defeated. And Emperor Romanus, captured alive, brought before Sultan Alp Arslan. Alp Arslan, in a gesture of mercy rare for the age, spares Romanus after negotiating a ransom and territorial concessions. But mercy ends at the border. When Romanos returns to Constantinople, he finds the throne taken. The Ducas faction blinds him, literally, and throws him into exile. Within a year, the former emperor dies in agony from his wounds, forgotten, discarded. Manzikert wasn't just a military disaster. It was the beginning of the Byzantine unravelling. In the years that followed, Turkish tribes flooded into Anatolia. What had been the empire's heartland became Turkish territory. One battle, one betrayal, broke the spine of an empire that had lasted 1,000 years. At Manzikert, Rome didn't fall in fire. It fell in silence and treachery. The Battle of Varna, 1444. In the heart of Eastern Europe, on the shores of the Black Sea, lies the ancient city of Varna. The year is 1444. A storm brews between east and west, and blood will soon flood the fields of Bulgaria. This is the final stand of the Crusaders, a desperate campaign to drive back the rising tide of the Ottoman Empire. On one side, the Christian coalition, led by King Władysław III of Poland and the legendary general John Hunyadi. Knights from Hungary, Poland, Wallachia, united under one cross. On the other, the formidable force of Sultan Murad II, determined to crush the invaders and secure his empire. The Christians marched with fire in their hearts, driven by faith, by pride, and by desperation. They believed they were chosen, the final sword of Christendom, sent to push back the darkness of the East. Over 20,000 knights, mercenaries, and warriors under one banner, led by a boy king and a battle-hardened general. But they didn't just underestimate the enemy's numbers, they underestimated the Sultan himself. Murad II, the Ottoman ruler, was no fool. He had already tasted war and victory. Tired of endless campaigns, he had agreed to a peace treaty, a truce with the Christian states, but the Crusaders broke it. Urged on by the Pope, they marched anyway, believing that Murad had stepped down, that his army would be scattered, that God was with them. They were wrong. When news of the betrayal reached him, Murad returned. With an army that matched the Crusaders in size and far outmatched them in experience. He carried not just weapons, but fury. Fury at broken oaths, fury at Christian pride. On November 10th, 1444, just outside Varna, the two forces met. What followed was chaos. The Ottoman centre held firm as wave after wave of Christian soldiers threw themselves into battle. Hunyadi's flanks made progress, but in the centre, something snapped. King Władysław III, just 20 years old, made a rash decision. Instead of holding formation, he charged straight at the Sultan's guard. A heroic move, but suicidal. His horse was brought down, and before his men could reach him, the young king was surrounded and killed. His head was mounted on a pike for all to see. His body was never found. The Christian army panicked. Leaderless, broken, they scattered, and then came the slaughter. Ottoman cavalry hunted down fleeing men. Archers cut down anyone still resisting. There were no prisoners. There was no mercy. When the sun set over Varna, the battlefield was a sea of corpses. More than 20,000 Christian soldiers lay dead or dying. The crusade crushed. The dream over. Varna had become a graveyard of faith, a symbol of broken pride. And the Sultan, Murad II, stood over the ruins of his enemies, a ruler of terrifying discipline and ruthless resolve. He would rule for 7 more years, tightening Ottoman control over the Balkans, securing the empire for his son, Mehmet II, the man who would one day conquer Constantinople. Varna wasn't just a defeat, it was a funeral for the last major crusade, a moment that ended an era. Battle of Hattin, 1187. The sun scorched the skies above the Holy Land. It was July the 4th, 1187, and the dry, jagged hills near the horns of Hattin, in what is now northern Israel, were about to witness the destruction of a kingdom. The Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem, desperate and divided, had gathered nearly all its remaining strength. King Guy of Lusignan led over 20,000 knights, foot soldiers and Templar warriors into the burning desert. Their mission? Relieve the siege of Tiberias, a strategic city under Muslim attack. But they were walking into a masterfully set trap. Tactics and heat. The trap of Hattin. Opposing them stood Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, better known in the West as Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, a warrior, a tactician, a patient predator. Saladin had lured the Crusaders into inhospitable terrain, miles from water, exposed under the searing sun, with no shelter, no rest, no escape. His army surrounded the Crusaders' every move. They harassed from a distance, arrows flying, hit-and-run cavalry strikes by seasoned Turkomans. They blocked wells, poisoned springs, and then they waited. As the Crusaders stumbled toward the horns of Hattin, Saladin delivered the final blow. He lit the dry grass on fire, smoke and ash rising around the exhausted Christians. The heat became unbearable, armor burned, thirst clawed at their throats, morale collapsed. With a roar, Saladin's army closed in. Archers opened the skies, cavalry thundered down the slopes. The Crusaders could barely lift their swords. Knights fell by the thousands, horses collapsed, men tried to flee, only to be cut down from behind. King Guy was captured. Beside him, Reynald of Châtillon, a warlord infamous for slaughtering Muslim pilgrims. Saladin offered Reynald a chance to repent. He refused. Saladin killed him with his own sword. No trial, no delay. A message to all who dared defy him. The true cross, carried into every major Christian battle since the First Crusade, was seized, held aloft by Saladin's men as a trophy of divine judgment. Nearly every Templar and Hospitaller knight was executed. Thousands more were ransomed, enslaved, or butchered. Aftermath: the fall of a kingdom. The defeat at Hattin was total. It shattered Crusader power in the Levant. Within 3 months, Saladin marched through city after city until finally Jerusalem surrendered in October 1187. But unlike the bloodshed of the First Crusade, Saladin spared the inhabitants, allowing Christians to leave in peace for a ransom. A moment of mercy after a sea of death. He had proven that discipline and strategy, not just steel and numbers, could win empires. Legacy, the rise of a legend. Saladin ruled with iron discipline, expanding his empire and fortifying the Islamic world. But he never ruled with greed. When he died in 1193, there was barely enough gold left to pay for his funeral. He had given it all away, to the poor, the sick, and the cause of jihad. He left behind no treasure, only a legacy. The Battle of Hattin was not just a victory. It was the death of a crusade, the fall of a kingdom, and the rise of a man whose name would echo through both Christian and Muslim chronicles, not as a barbarian, but as a ruler, a tactician, and a legend. The Battle of Stalingrad. The year is 1942, the place, Stalingrad, a grey industrial city on the western bank of the Volga River, deep within Soviet Russia. To Hitler, it's a symbolic prize, a city bearing the name of his enemy. To Stalin, it is personal. Stalingrad must not fall. What begins here will become the deadliest battle in human history. In the summer of 1942, Operation Barbarossa is in full swing, Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union. Hitler redirects his forces south toward the oil fields of the Caucasus and toward Stalingrad. Over 2 million soldiers, hundreds of tanks, bombers, artillery units converge on this one city. The Germans, under General Friedrich Paulus, begin with overwhelming firepower. Stalingrad is bombed into rubble, but that rubble becomes the Soviets' greatest weapon. Into tents, the Nazis advance, and the Red Army pulls them into a meat grinder. Street by street, building by building, room by room. Snipers like Vasily Zaitsev wait in the shadows. Civilians dig trenches. Women fight beside men. Sewer tunnels become highways. Factories become fortresses. Stalingrad becomes a maze where death waits around every corner. Then winter arrives. Temperatures drop below -30 degrees Centigrade. The Volga freezes. Supplies dwindle. The Red Army endures, fueled by desperation and resolve. The German Sixth Army, stretched thin and deep in Soviet territory, begins to freeze and starve. In November 1942, the Soviets strike back. Operation Uranus, a massive flanking maneuver, encircles over 250,000 Axis troops inside the city. Now, the hunters become the hunted. Hitler demands they fight to the last man. General Paulus pleads for permission to retreat. He is denied. Starvation sets in. Many rats, horses, even strips of frozen leather to survive. Disease spreads. Ammunition runs out. Morale shatters. Street battles turn into silent, frozen standoffs. Soldiers dying not in gunfire, but in silence. Curled in snowdrifts, too weak to move. By February 1943, Paulus is forced to surrender. He becomes the first German field marshal in history to be captured alive. The numbers defy belief. Over 750,000 Axis troops killed, wounded or captured. 1.1 million Soviet casualties, soldiers and civilians alike. 1 in every 10 deaths of World War II happened at Stalingrad. Hitler never recovers from the loss. Nazi momentum breaks. Soviet forces begin pushing west, all the way to Berlin. Stalingrad marks the turning point of the Second World War, not just in strategy, but in spirit. Stalingrad was not a victory. It was a graveyard for over 2 million souls, frozen, starved, and forgotten in the ruins of pride.
Some stood tall, some were broken, but none left the battlefield unchanged. These weren't just battles, they were hell, fought with grit, rage, and the raw instinct to survive. History may glorify the victors, but it never hides the cost. If you made it this far, you're not just watching, you're remembering. Hit that like, drop a comment, subscribe for more untold chapters carved in blood and fire. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, war leaves no soul untouched.